Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We are on Monday again, which means we're going to be looking at the estimated numbers for the Christmas holiday. Full disclosure, this was not my plan for this week's show, but I've had a family situation come up that's going to require me to do some traveling this week. So I'm trying to get as much done before I leave as I can. So we'll be looking at the estimates today, and then the rest of the week, it's a busy week. I've still got my best and worst of the year and a bunch of other stuff to do. You may be seeing that from the road, so just bear with me on that. Just sort of one of those little things that life throws at you sometimes. But let's look at the box office charts for this past weekend and really for the Christmas holiday. And we'll start with the 3-day weekend. Avatar Fire and Ash had those James Cameron legs kicking in. It dropped just 28.2% from its opening weekend and brought in $64 million just over the 26th through the 28th. So that's not even all of the peak Christmas movie-going season. Its domestic total now is at $217.6 million. We'll take a close look at that performance in just a couple minutes. Zootopia 2 had a 34.7% increase in business in its 5th weekend of release. So this was obviously the family pick for people that were heading out with everybody in tow. It made about $20 million for a domestic total of $321.3 million. Marty Supreme outstripped all of the prognostications for how it would do. One of the best openings for A24, which we're going to look at, it brought in $17.5 million just over the 3 days. Keep in mind it opened officially on Christmas Day. We're going to look at the full weekend figures in just a minute. It's made $28.2 million thus far. The Housemaid held up well. It dropped 19% to bring in another $15.4 million. It's at $46.4 million domestic. Anaconda debuted in 5th place with $14.5 million over the 3-day weekend and $23.6 million since it opened on Christmas. David, in its 2nd weekend, saw a steeper drop than just about every other movie in the top 10 except for Five Nights at Freddy's. It dropped 42.3% and brought in $12.6 million. So there was obviously a little bit more front loading on that film, which is from Angel Studios. The SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, dropped 28.3%. So not really a big increase in business. It looks like for animation, people weren't choosing David or SpongeBob. They were picking Zootopia 2. It made $11.2 million. Song Sung Blue, the Neil Diamond cover band movie based on a true story, debuted in 8th place with $7.6 million. Wicked for Good had a slight increase in business in 9th place at $5.2 million, and Five Nights at Freddy's 2 dropped 42.5%, but brought in another $4.4 million. So looking at what I call the 5-day Christmas weekend, so this is December 24th, Christmas Eve, which is not a massive movie-going day, but does bring some people in to the Cineplexes, and then Christmas Day through Sunday the 28th. Avatar Fire and Ash ruled that frame with $98.7 million. Zootopia 2 brought in $28.4 million. Marty Supreme almost took 2nd place for the full Christmas weekend at $27.1 million. Anaconda coming in at $23.6 million. The Housemaid coming in at $20.3 million. David came in at $19.8 million. The SpongeBob movie with $16.1 million. Song Sung Blue at just over $12 million. Wicked for Good comes in at $7.48 million, and Five Nights at Freddy's comes in 10th place at $5.9 million. So let's talk a little bit about Avatar Fire and Ash. On last week's show, I said you can't judge James Cameron movies or Christmas movies based on their opening weekend, and Avatar Fire and Ash is showing the kind of legs that the other Avatar movies have shown, even if the totals are a little bit lower overall. Let's look at where the movie falls thus far as James Cameron's domestic grosses. Right now, it's at number 4 with $217.6 million, but that puts it about $450 million behind Titanic, which is at number 3, Avatar: The Way of Water, which is at number 2, and Avatar, which is currently number 1 at $785.2 million. Terminator 2 Judgment Day is at number 5, followed by True Lies, Aliens, The Abyss, and The Terminator. But when you adjust those numbers for inflation, Titanic is the winner with $1.5 billion domestic adjusted for inflation, and that's with each of its major releases adjusted according to the year when those releases were in theaters. Avatar comes in at $1.18 billion. So Cameron, when you adjust for inflation, has $2 billion domestic grossers. Avatar: The Way of Water comes in at $777 million. Terminator 2: Judgment Day comes in fourth at $487.4 million. True Lies comes in fifth at $319.9 million. Aliens comes in at $251.8 million. Then we have Avatar: Fire and Ash at $217.6 million. The Abyss at $143.1 million. And the original Terminator at $118.6 million. And this is what I mentioned before. Avatar: The Way of Water and Avatar: Fire and Ash are following a similar pattern. It's just that The Way of Water was overall a bigger grosser at the domestic box office. You can see that Way of Water opened up a bigger lead. Fire and Ash was able to close that gap a little bit, but the thing to keep in mind here is you see that little bit of an uptick in day 10 of release for Avatar: The Way of Water. Because of the difference in release dates, this chart basically does not show the Christmas surge for Avatar: The Way of Water, which is already in the rear view for Avatar: Fire and Ash. So we probably are going to see that gap grow over the next couple days, and then we'll see what the legs look like after that. So this chart's going to look a little bit different next week when we look at it, but just something to note when you're comparing these two movies' performances. Of course, both Avatar films were massive domestic hits, and it remains to be seen just how big Avatar: Fire and Ash is going to be, and if it's going to be able to become the number one domestic grosser of the year. But let's look at how it's doing against the current number one domestic grossing film, which is a Minecraft movie. A Minecraft movie here in blue, Avatar: Fire and Ash, once again, in orange. And you can see that the Minecraft movie, of course, had a much bigger opening weekend. You see that big surge through days 1, 2, and 3. But that gap has narrowed. You can see those Christmas legs kicking in and closing the gap between those two movies. Now, does Avatar: Fire and Ash have enough staying power to definitively close that gap and become the number one movie of the year? Well, we don't know. This week coming up is another big week for people to head to theaters before the new year officially starts and everybody gets back to work and to their lives. So we should know a lot more about this on next week's show. But we have kind of an interesting situation here with the Minecraft movie in that it could very well end up being the number one movie of the year, and also a movie that was released in the earlier part of the year, which isn't that common, and that's actually my member poll question for today. Since 1980, how many times has the domestic number one grossing film of the year been released in the month of April or before? A Minecraft movie was released in April. How many other movies that were released in the first third of the year ended up being number one domestically? I'll give you a second to think about it. Now, for these purposes, we're going to say that Minecraft is the number one movie because it is right now. And here comes the answer. The answer is 4, and all of them happened within the last 10 years. So if the Minecraft movie stays at number one, it will have achieved that feat opening on April 4th. Bad Boys for Life was number one domestically in 2020. It opened on January 17th. Of course, shortly after Bad Boys for Life opened, all of the theaters closed. So yes, you can put an asterisk by that, but it is still part of the record books. And then Avengers Endgame was the number one release of 2019. It got a jump on the summer season by opening on April 26th. And Black Panther was the number one domestic release of 2018. It opened all the way back in February. So only 4 times in the last 45 years have we seen a movie that opens in April or earlier be number one domestically. Minecraft will be the 4th of those movies if it can stick to number one. Zootopia 2 is also continuing to do very well. These are the top 10 highest grossing Disney animation films. Now, Zootopia 2 has not moved since the last time we looked at this chart, but if you'll take a look, it's only about $20 million behind the first Zootopia to become the 5th highest grossing Disney animation film of all time, unadjusted for inflation. So it should make that jump this week, and then we'll see if it can break that $400 million barrier. Maybe that will be the movie that ends up being the number one grosser of the year. It's got a lot of work to do, but we're also in a very abnormal box office season. I mentioned Marty Supreme and the fact that it had one of the best openings ever for A24. It was actually the second best wide opening for A24 ever. So that is a movie that opened in wide release or a movie that expanded to wide release after opening in limited release. The biggest opening weekend for A24 thus far was Civil War, which opened to $25.7 million. And Marty Supreme is number 2, even though it has 2 separate sets of asterisks. Number 1, it did open in limited release. We talked about that extensively on the show last week. And number 2, which is uncommon with any of these other films, it opened on a Thursday. So there's a whole day's worth of gross that doesn't go into this opening weekend figure, and yet it's still the second highest opener in A24 history. That bumps Hereditary down to number 3, Materialists from earlier this year down to number 4, Heretics at number 5, Talk to Me is at number 6, Uncut Gems is at number 7. It opened to $9.5 million after also opening in limited release. The Witch, Warfare, and Bring Her Back round out the top 10. And Marty Supreme is already the 9th highest grossing domestic release in A24 history at $28.29 million. So just to put it in perspective, Baby Girl, which was A24's Christmas release last year, made $28.1 million throughout its entire domestic run. Marty Supreme has made more than that in 4 days of wide release. And if it continues this kind of momentum at the box office, then we could see it making a play for number 1 on this chart. I anticipate it moving up quickly, so that is, of course, something I'll be tracking over the next several weeks. Looking at the overall weekend top 10, there were 2 movies that dropped out. One of them was Durandar, which is out after 3 weeks, and Hamnet is back out of the top 10 after 1 week, although this was its second appearance in the top 10. And looking at the biggest theater count changes for the weekend of December 26th, Marty Supreme added 2,662 theaters from its 6-theater limited run, so it's number 1 on this chart. Ella McKay, which I'm pretty sure Disney wanted to have as a big holiday release from James L. Brooks, instead crashed almost completely out of theaters by Christmas. It lost 2,050 theaters and remained in just 450, so a big box office disappointment there. Wicked for Good lost over 900 theaters, but is still in over 2,000. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 lost 732 theaters, and Eternity lost over half of its remaining theaters. It's now in just 203. This is what I like to call our road to recovery, and this is likely the last time that you're going to see this iteration of the chart, and we'll explain why in just a minute. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is the average for 2021 to 2024, and that dotted black line is every weekend this year. And you can see that we did have an uptick in the last weekend of the year, and it was better than we have been doing generally since theaters reopened, but still well below the peak or where we were pre-pandemic from 2015 to 2019. And for a year that many had pegged to perhaps have a significant box office recovery, we didn't really see that throughout the year. Now, people are already looking at 2026 and saying that that's going to be the year where we see a consistent box office recovery. But keep in mind, that's also what people said about 2025. And we're going to do a recap of the entire year at the box office on next week's show. But I wanted to look at how this year has moved the needle on this pre-COVID, post-COVID comparison that we've been doing, this road to recovery. So this is what the chart looks like without the weekend graphics for every week this year. So the blue line on top, the red line largely on bottom. When you add in all of the box office numbers for this year, this is what happens to the red line. And if you miss the difference, I wouldn't blame you because it's not very different. We saw some bigger peaks right around March. That's largely due to a Minecraft movie and Sinners doing so well this year. The summer movie season really remained unchanged. The fall box office season still remained well below average when it comes to where we were pre-pandemic and even dipped lower in some cases. And the holiday movie season caught up a little bit, specifically around Thanksgiving. But this looks less and less like a road to recovery and more like a chart of the new normal. So what I'm going to do last year is we're going to scrap looking at pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, because I think enough data has come in now that we know where we stand. And I'm going to have a similar chart in 2026 that instead tracks it week by week. So how is 2026 doing compared to 2025. We're going from the improvement over a number of years to just see how the box office might be improving year over year. Is 2026 really going to be the year of a big box office comeback, or is it going to match what we saw in 2025? So that's the adjustment that we'll do next week, and probably at the end of 2026, we'll see if there were any major changes to this road to recovery chart. But that's pretty much where we are. We're looking at year over year increases. We are not looking at a multi-year return to what we might call normal. And as we wrap up 2025, I asked the members here on the channel what the most surprising box office hit of the year was, and the winner was overwhelming with 64 votes. Sinners more than doubled up the second place answer, which was Weapons, with those 64 votes, the most surprising box office hit of the year. Weapons came in second with 27 votes. K-pop Demon Hunters actually came in third with 25 votes, and that was largely due to people saying, yes, I know it's a streaming movie, but they were still surprised it showed as much strength at the box office when it had that limited run over a month after it hit streaming. The Conjuring Last Rites, and particularly its opening weekend, came in fourth with 20 votes, and a Minecraft movie, and perhaps its number one domestic finish, came in number 5 with 15 votes. So for the first show of 2026, I want to know the answer to the question, what was the most surprising flop of 2025? Now, this could either be an outright box office bomb or a film that maybe wasn't a bomb but significantly underperformed expectations. You can put your favorite in the comments of the member poll. If your answer's already there, upvote it, please, instead of leaving it twice. It makes it easier to calculate, and I will reveal those results on next week's Charts with Dan. So let's turn our attention away from the domestic box office and see what the top 5 films of the past weekend were internationally. At number 1, of course, was Avatar: Fire and Ash. It had a similar decline internationally as it did domestically. It only dropped 29.5% for $181.2 million. Zootopia 2 dropped just 11.5% internationally for $67.9 million. Then in third place, we have Buen Camino, making $29.2 million. This was a movie that opened in Italy, and it was sort of the Avengers Endgame of Italy. It set all kinds of box office records. It's a comedy about a father searching for his lost daughter, and it made a massive amount of noise. And it just goes to show you that country by country, there can be movies you've never even heard of that are the talk of the town. The SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, brought in $22.1 million internationally, and Anaconda brought in $20 million. When you take those international numbers and you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide, and Avatar: Fire and Ash ruled the world for a second weekend, bringing in $245.2 million. That's just a 28.9% decrease. Its global total is now at $760.3 million, so it is steaming its way towards $1 billion. Zootopia 2 dropped just 3.6% worldwide for another $87.9 million. It's now at $1.4 billion with a B. Anaconda opened to $34.5 million over the weekend and $43.6 million so far worldwide. The SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, opened to $33.3 million and has already banked $60 million worldwide. And The Housemaid saw a 52.8% increase in business for a $29.2 million weekend. Its global total is now $60.5 million. And the important thing to remember about Avatar: Fire and Ash is it may not be headed towards $2 billion. It doesn't look like it is, but it doesn't need to make $2 billion to be a financial success. We are heading towards that success point already. It just looks like it's going to be less profitable than Avatar: The Way of Water. So I think that the decision that Disney and Fox and James Cameron are going to have to make with the movie is not necessarily, oh, this last movie flopped, should we do any more? Because that's not the case. I do think they're going to have to take a hard look, though, and say, all right, we have seen now I think, reasonable and marked decline between the second movie and the third movie. So do we want to consider putting resources into these films? And how much do we want to consider putting into these films? Perhaps the decline would be arrested with another movie. Perhaps it would continue. Nobody knows. But for me, if you're talking about a decision point, it's not in the context of this movie didn't do well. It's just that it did less well And so, what are we going to put into this franchise going forward? Let's return back to the domestic box office, and we'll start with what I like to call our specialty charts. These are the top per theater averages for the past weekend. At number 1 was the latest film from Park Chan-wook, No Other Choice, which opened in 13 theaters and brought in $24,000 per theater. It will expand in the weeks to come, and you'll probably hear a little bit more about this movie on my programming later this week. The Testament of Ann Lee, which is garnering some significant Oscar buzz for star Amanda Seyfried, brought in $17,750 per theater in 4 theaters. Avatar Fire and Ash brought in $16,842 per theater in just over 3,800 theaters. So again, movie theater owners probably had very few complaints about this past weekend. They were pretty busy. Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, which is the latest film from Jim Jarmusch, brought in $12,000 per theater in 4 theaters. And opening in 2 theaters is the film The Plague, which opened at $10,616 per theater. It's getting a much wider release next week, the first week of the new year. And that is also a movie that you might hear about later this week. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, Durandar may have been out of the top 10, but it still led the way as far as limited release goes, bringing in another $1.69 million. Hamnet in 391 theaters brought in $700,000. No Other Choice in 13 theaters brought in $312,000. Sarvam Maya, another film from India, brought in $274,000 in an unknown number of theaters. And Brazil's The Secret Agent brought in $221,000 in 136 theaters. This is the fall holiday box office chart, so this is actually the last week that a new film would be eligible for this chart, though we will still count revenue towards it as we head into 2026. This is all movies that open domestically post-Labor Day. Wicked for Good right now is still at number 1, but Zootopia 2 is only $10 million behind it, so it looks like it's going to take over that top spot. And then we'll see what Avatar Fire and Ash does. It's up 4 spots to number 3 at $217.6 million. The Conjuring Last Rites and Demon Slayer Infinity Castle are both down 1 spot to numbers 4 and 5. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is down to number 6. Predator Badlands is down to number 7. And Black Phone 2, Tron Ares, and One Battle After Another, as of right now, round out the rest of the seasonal top 10. Looking at the annual domestic box office for 2025, and remember, Avatar Fire and Ash's income will continue to count towards this chart, toward the 2025 releases. It's now the 10th highest grossing film of the year at $217.6 million. That drops Captain America Brave New World out of the top 10 and leaves the MCU with only 1 out of 3 films in the year-end top 10. The Fantastic Four First Steps at number 8 just a few years ago. That would have been pretty much inconceivable. How to Train Your Dragons at number 9. The Fantastic Four First Steps is at number 8. Sinners is at number 7. Zootopia 2 right now is at number 6, although it looks like it's going to break into the top 5 and then keep going up in the coming days. Wicked for Good's at number 5. Jurassic World Rebirth's at number 4. Superman's at number 3. And then we have Lilo and Stitch and a Minecraft movie separated by only about $200,000, less than really, but with a Minecraft movie still on top for 2025. And looking at the worldwide box office for this year, Avatar Fire and Ash enters the chart at number 7, just below Demon Slayer Infinity Castle. That bumps How to Train Your Dragon, F1 the movie, and Superman all down 1 spot. And it drops Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning out of the worldwide top 10 altogether. I believe this is the first Mission Impossible film to not make the top 10 at the worldwide box office. I could be wrong. Jurassic World Rebirth, a Minecraft movie, Lilo and Stitch, Zootopia 2, and Nudja 2 rounding out the top 10 there, with Nudja 2, of course, being an easy number 1. So that's what's going on at the box office. Before we go, though, there are also some big numbers to look at on the streaming charts, and particularly when we get to the Nielsen charts. But let's start with the latest numbers from Netflix. New ones will be released tomorrow. These were the top 10 most viewed programs on Netflix from December 15th to the 21st. At number 1 was The Great Flood, which is a movie from South Korea about a flood that threatens to submerge the entire world. It brought in 27.86 million views total, and Wake Up Dead Man gets bumped down to number 2 at 20.88 million views total, which is still tracking significantly behind Glass Onion. And really, these Christmas week numbers are the last chance for that movie to make up some ground to see if people were waiting to watch it. Otherwise, Netflix is going to be looking at a substantial downturn in performance between Glass Onion and Wake Up Dead Man. Man vs. Baby Season 1 is at number 3 with 14.6 million views. Then we have the debut of Emily in Paris Season 5 at 13.52 million views. The Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight brought in 10.93 million views, although keep in mind that is the total watch time over the entire duration of the fight, including undercards. I would imagine that the main event was watched by quite a few more people than the ratings reflect. Stranger Things Season 5 is down to number 6 at 8.16 million views. We'll see if that number gets bumped up once the new episodes are added in with the next batch of numbers. The Grinch hits the top 10 at number 7 with just over 8 million views. K-Pop Demon Hunters, that movie came out many, many months ago and has yet to leave the top 10. Still at number 8 with 7.86 million views. The Croods, A New Age at number 9 with 7.52 million views. And My Secret Santa rounding out the top 10 with 7.4 million views. And when we look at the most watched programs of 2025 on Netflix, Stranger Things Season 5 has broken the 100 million view barrier to get up to number 9. Now that number may drop a bit depending on how many people watch the second batch of episodes, or it may go up. It could get up to number 8 pretty easily. But the thing when I look at this chart is just how many of these programs came out during the early part of the year. Netflix hasn't really had a huge number of massive hits this year. Again, K-Pop Demon Hunters is doing a lot of the heavy lifting with now over 500 million total views, which is absolutely insane. But in an alternate world where there was no K-Pop Demon Hunters, I think what we'd be talking about is the fact that Netflix didn't really launch a whole lot of big culturally penetrating hits. Stranger Things, obviously, Wednesday a little bit, but it's been more of a case of downturns. K-Pop Demon Hunters really saved them a lot there. Now let's take a look at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, unlike the Netflix numbers, these are domestic numbers only, not worldwide numbers, and they're delayed by about a month because that's when they put them out on the website. So these are the most watched streaming movies for November 24th through the 30th, which is Thanksgiving week. At number 1 was How the Grinch Stole Christmas, starring Jim Carrey on Peacock, which brought in 11.15 million hours watched. K-Pop Demon Hunters stays there at number 2. Jingle Bell Heist on Netflix debuts in 3rd place at 9.15 million hours watched. Then we have Wicked on Amazon Prime Video at just over 9 million hours. Home Alone, which is on this chart every single year right around Christmas, and it will probably be on this chart many more times over the next few weeks. It came in with 8.3 million hours watched. Zootopia on Disney Plus, kind of tied in with the release of Zootopia 2, comes in at number 6 with 7.58 million hours watched. Then we have In Your Dreams at number 7. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which I think was boosted by being added to Netflix. We saw that with Blue Beetle last week, comes in at number 8. Elf on HBO Max comes in at number 9 with 6.6 million hours watched. And Playdate comes in at number 10 with 6.2 million hours watched. But this is where we saw some real blockbuster numbers. These were the most watched streaming shows for November 24th through 30th, which was when we saw the debut of the new batch of episodes, that first batch for Stranger Things Season 5. And Stranger Things was the most watched show, according to Nielsen's ratings, as it was the week before new episodes premiered, but it came in with 141 million hours watched, about 120 million hours ahead of the second place show, which was Landman with 22.3 million hours watched. That was by far the most watch time accumulated by any series this year, according to Nielsen, and we'll look at that number in just a second. The Beast in Me comes in third at 17.65 million hours watched. Then we have Absentia at 14.65 million hours watched. Homeland enters the chart at number 5. That, I believe, was also added to Netflix, so we've seen a boost in views for Homeland. A Man on the Inside returns to the chart at number 6. Bob's Burgers is back at number 7. Bluey's at number 8. SpongeBob SquarePants is at number 9. And NCIS is at number 10. And as I mentioned, these are the top hourly performances for a streaming series this year. Stranger Things comes in at 141 million hours watched. That's nearly double the previous number 1, which was Squid Game. Squid Game Season 2 had a full week of release from December 30th of last year to January 5th of this year, and it brought in 76.58 million hours watched, and it held that record basically all year, but it was absolutely demolished by Stranger Things. Of course, there are more episodes of Stranger Things, but we saw this momentum building over time and just a massive surge in viewership. So, you can look at the ratings for season 5, and this is, again, just the first batch of episodes, but domestically, at least, Stranger Things was an absolute juggernaut. Then we have the debut weeks of both batches of Wednesday's season 2 episodes at 62.5 million and 55.6 million views. And then the launch week of Squid Game season 3 back in June, which brought in 53.4 million hours watched for that series. So a dominant performance by Stranger Things. Remember, that's all episodes, not just the new ones that came out around Thanksgiving. And when we look at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, Stranger Things, despite having 38 episodes, which I believe is more than almost any other show on this list, brought in an average watch time per episode of 3.71 million hours. And I would imagine that those views were weighted even more towards the new episodes from season 5. Nielsen does not break out series by season, so we don't know how much each individual season of Stranger Things was watched, but each episode was watched for an average of 3.71 million hours. The Beast in Me comes in at 2.21 million hours per episode for just 8 episodes. Landman comes in at 1.72 million hours per episode as it continued its latest season run. Missing, Dead or Alive comes in at 1.18 million hours per episode with a new batch of episodes. All Her Fault continues to hang around this chart at over 1 million hours per episode for 8 episodes. Then we have Ms. Rachel at number 6, A Man on the Inside at number 7, Absentia at number 8, Tulsa King at number 9, and Homeland rounding out the top 10, even though it has 97 episodes with 146,000 hours watched per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you this week. Now, the post-Christmas week is usually pretty slow because all the studios have put everything out right around Christmas time. But there are still a few things, both at home and in theaters, that you might want to check out. First of all, tomorrow on Tuesday, Wicked for Good makes its debut for digital purchase and premium video on demand. It's doing a release right around New Year's Eve, which is what they did last year for the first film. Then on Wednesday, which is New Year's Eve, the Stranger Things series finale will air on Netflix. I will have my review of that as soon as I can possibly get it to you. Again, I have a little bit of instability in my week coming up, but we will see how things shake out schedule-wise. Also on Wednesday, Together makes its debut on Hulu, so if you didn't see it in theaters, you can watch it at home. On Friday, The Plague, which I mentioned earlier, will be expanding into many more theaters, and we'll also be getting a zombie movie called We Bury the Dead, starring Daisy Ridley and Britton Thwaites, in theaters around the country. Then on Sunday, January 4th, which also happens to be my birthday, the Critics' Choice Awards will air on E! And the USA Network. I'm very lucky to be a part of Critics' Choice, and I will be casting my ballot for those awards in the next few days. And that's everything I've got for you here on Charts with Dan for this week. It was a very interesting week at the Christmas box office, and we'll see how it plays out over the next few weeks. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, share the video, tell your friends. And like I said, I'll be back later this week at some point with my picks for the best movies of 2025 and also some movies that were not my favorite. I've been watching movies right up until the deadline. Really, these last 2 days, I think I've watched 5 or 6 movies trying to get in as many as I possibly can. And I'm also going to try to work on a preview for 2026, so you'll know what we'll be talking about here on the channel next year. And of course, any other breaking news or other stuff that might come up, if I'm able to cover it, I'll bring it to you. Thank you so much for once again braving the estimates with me. I will be back later this week. I'm not sure exactly when, but probably in the next day or two with my best and worst of 2025 list. Until then, take care, and I'll see you then.